one has to, something very interesting going on in Saudi Arabia. Watch Saudi Arabian production, because 3 months ago that was up at about 10.5 million barrels a day. Recently it's come down to less than 10.2 million barrels per day. So yes, Saudi has cut production. I think, as far as I can make out, Saudi production using Brent as a benchmark, ideally they'd be uncomfortable with prices much above $80 a barrel.
So you see them in a range, you see them managing that sort of 60, 70, I think you said.
Well, 70, 80.
70, 80, so
for Brent.
You know, yes,
yeah,
for Brent. And on the subject of how you play the oil, the oil price, though, Bob, I've got a chart here that shows the correlation between European oil stocks.
Yes.
Hello again, everybody. It's Andy here with Garcia Research, looking at the markets, looking at the currency pairs that we like to trade, of course, as you know. Looking across the dashboard, talking about the major currencies on the London Open. Waiting for the London Open. It should be open in about 45 minutes. Right now we're getting started in Europe, and at the moment it looks like a little quiet as per the dashboard that we look at. In the moment, we're just waiting for some key interest rate announcements to come out over the next couple of days, and I gather that is pretty much what is keeping the market quiet. But in the meantime, it looks like we do have a little bit of activity in terms of you have the Canadian dollar basically trading off of the lows, but still within last week's trading range. And of course you have the Japanese yen still inside of last week's trading range, but it is closer to the highs than it was momentarily. We're just sitting here waiting to see if these interest rate announcements can move the market, and I gather that at this very moment it's keeping the market rather quiet. So we had the breakout in the pound over the past couple of days, and we've pulled back. Well, we're still relatively trading inside of last week's trading range when it comes to all these markets. So we'll take a look at the dashboard, and then we'll even cover some of the other currency pairs, because looks like that's what's going to be on the focus right now. The dollar index futures still only flat, right around 0.05%. I mean, we're still sitting at the unchanged area. Key movers that I would probably be paying attention to at this point are the New Zealand yen and the pound yen. Actually, they're the ones that are practically sitting on the lows. We'll talk about those in a minute. And in terms of your winners, it looks like the CAD Swiss and the USD Swiss. So nothing really too exciting. Those two winners are only up about 0.1%, getting close to 0.2%. Just a quiet trading range right now. But it looks like the Canadian dollar has my attention at this point, because we are pretty close to breaking below last week's low. It looks like the New Zealand dollar is trading below last week's low, as we were talking about yesterday. So let me take a look at the dashboard, and we'll show you what we're talking about here. Of course, as you can see, what we're looking at is the dollar pairs that we always trade. You got the dollar up at the top left, the Swiss franc, the Canadian dollar, and then the Japanese yen. Those are the pairs that we're looking at across the top. The bottom, we have the euro, pound, Aussie, New Zealand. All of these are on the weekly time frame, and of course you're looking at a 40-period moving average with them. But what I'm looking at here is, notice this red bar here. It looks like we did come down to last week's low, and it looks like we've been bouncing off of last week's low. So if we look at last week's low is at 130.37. This week's low is at 130.38. It looks like we're actually pretty close to a point where we got something to look at here in terms of a bounce coming in the Canadian dollar. So once again, I'll show you here. Let's go take a look at the United States Canadian dollar. You can see how the market came all the way down, bounced at the level here at 130.38, hitting the low from last week. Alright, so now the question is whether or not we're going to actually stabilize here and then go higher, or we're going to continue to break down below last week's low. So this low here at 130.38, if we continue to move below last week's low, that's going to actually entice some more selling. So that's where my my attention is at this point.
It was pretty clear in the summer of 2008 that we hadn't solved the fundamental problem, that something deeper would have to be done, and absent that, then we would see the failure of another institution. And I think Lehman Brothers was top of most people's list.
Bear with me while I'm still trying to get my charts kind of set up. Overall, that's okay. Activity level is relatively quiet here in the rest of the market, for that matter. USD
somehow on Sunday the 14th of September we were happy with what was going on, and then on the 15th we suddenly got bad news. That wasn't right. We knew the whole system was in trouble. People knew the banking system was in deep trouble. In the week before Lehman Brothers failed, there was a concern about Lehman Brothers. It was building up, and I think the conversation took place over the weekend.
Alright, so you had a chance to get in somewhere around 31.60 when the market actually started to fall apart, which was probably somewhere around somewhere over here. No, that's not it either. 31.60 would have been your entry if somewhere over here, I guess.
They concluded that a deal would be lovely. They couldn't find an American bank to buy.
You would have had an entry at 31.60, a little bit of a run up on you. But you can see here that again, the Canadian dollar trading near the lows. So I'm watching this here to see if we can actually get a bounce or if we're going to continue to move lower. We should also pay attention to the New Zealand pairs, or the Japanese pairs. The New Zealand yen is down 0.3%. This chart looks a little bit more erratic. All right. So the reason, okay, compared to like what we're looking at in the Canadian dollar, so the Canadian dollar is at a low here, and the question is whether or not we're going to bounce and then continue to move higher, or if we're going to actually push down below last week's low. Now, if we push below last week's low, you can see that we don't really have very much room to run, because we'll just be pushing into this moving average here down at 129.45. It can happen though. I mean, we could definitely push down. That's about 100 pips away, and if it does happen, then you know, we just have to kind of be cautious with the trade. But 130.121 has my attention, because that's the 60 period. That's the 60-minute 50 period moving average. The 50 on the 60 is what I say. The Japanese yen, it looks like it's at a point where it's almost ready to break out, but doesn't look like it's, you know, trading very actively. Again, the markets at this point have opened up in London, or no, in Europe. We have about 35 minutes left to go before we actually open up in London, and then you know, as we've talked about for the past couple of days, we should bring up
but the leverage has switched into
your calendar here.
now coming back to your question, when you have a 10-year
Again,
of fiscal
you could go to forexfactory.com,
addition, you have
and if you punch in forexfactory.com/calendar.php, brings up a calendar. Now, when you get the calendar, it's going to have, you can see the impact here, the column that says impact. Normally, you'll have all kinds of different colors that will represent unimportant events and whatnot. So what I do is I go up here to this filter and I remove the other impacts, the medium impact, the low impact, and then the non-economic information here. I keep all the rest of it checked, everything else checked, and I just want the most important impact. This allows me to at least just pay attention to the main economic releases that I need to be aware of, so I'm not caught off guard and such. But it looks like we don't really have anything until the PPI comes out today. Okay, so the USD PPI, which means to me that we're kind of free and clear when it comes to the European and London session. Okay, so what that means to me is that we don't have to worry about any kind of thing, anything to come out of the blue in Europe and London, or that could impact the market with any significance for that matter. So, as opposed to, say, for instance, later on in the week, we're waiting for something to come out on Thursday here. We have the bank rates. Okay, so we have the official bank rate from London, and then we also have it. Let's see here. I thought we were gonna have one in Europe, but it looks like the London bank here. You can see the central bank out there. We do have an ECB press conference, which some might consider to be important. I really don't. I'm not really concerned about that. Oh, here it is, the refinancing rate in Europe. Okay, so these might actually have. These are, I think, what the market is currently waiting for at this point. So we just want to make sure that this will be for tomorrow. But for today, it looks like we have PPI, we have crude oil inventories, and then we don't have anything until tonight, where you have some economic releases out of Australia. So for that matter, when I see that I'm kind of free and clear, I don't have anything to worry about in London and Europe, then that means that I can, it's almost like you could trade freely. You don't have to worry about not taking a trade because there's going to be economic release, which is typically the case. If there's going to be a data release, then you kind of want to hang tight. So back to the Canadian dollar. So just kind of paying attention here to the price action. I'm watching that Canadian dollar to see if it can get below last week's low, and if it can, then that is going to set up for a breakout to the downside. Not very much activity showing up here at the moment in the European session. However, it looks like you're getting a nice little bounce in the pound. But again, everything is still kind of quiet, so just kind of sit back. And it looks like we have to just sit on our hands once again. and this is kind of this is normal. This is par for the course. This is what we can expect whenever you have a major economic data releases. The market has a tendency to go quiet. It turns the trade into a scalping environment, and it's crucial. It's vital to make sure that you have a watch list with the net change on the session. You want to watch the net percentage change, because that allows you to keep tabs on what's actually moving. Looks like the New Zealand CAD is also kind of something to pay attention to. So it looks a little erratic here, but you can see that it's been moving from 85.40 down about 40 pips. It's still kind of quiet though.
WTI trading near $70 a barrel as the Category 4 storm heads towards the U.S. East Coast. Plus, Asia's rout rolls on. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index heads for 10 straight days of declines, its longest consecutive drop since 2002. The Hang Seng falls deeper into a bear market. Most European markets, however, are trading higher. Good morning. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets, the European Open. I'm Matt Miller in Berlin. 30 minutes into the session alongside Anna Edwards at our European headquarters in London. Anna?
Matt, let's have a look, as you say, 30 minutes into the trading day. Let's see what...
You can see how choppy the market is right now. You can see how choppy, I mean, this market is just going crazy sideways. So this is kind of what I've been noticing across the board.
So that's one we're watching. Hermes up by 3%. Apparently. Let's have a look at what's moving on the downside, because there's a definite theme to some of the moves on the downside, and it's UK utilities. At the bottom, we've got Scottish and Southern. This is down by 8.4% after a profit warning. Apparently, the warmer weather is set to dent the profits at some of these businesses. E.ON, of course, is German, but it operates heavily in the UK. Centrica, also in the energy space. Severn Trent in energy. National Grid, a different variety of energy, but still operates in the energy sector. So that's what's going on.
Here's a quick look at the dollar index. This is the U.S. dollar, and you can see this is an 8-hour chart. Just trading sideways here, going completely sideways. Okay, yesterday I think we had, let's see, 2, 3, 4. This right here was yesterday. Okay, this was the beginning of the week, or this was I think this was last Thursday. And then we ran up, and then we were up here at the beginning of the week, came down. Here we are going sideways. So this market is getting really quiet. On the 8-hour chart, if you zoom out a tiny bit, what I'm watching here. Let's see if I can bring in some data. Oh, that should be good enough. I think one of the lessons that we learn as traders is that whenever the market is quiet, we need to be able to recognize that and be able to take a step back and not do anything. So as much as we would like to just sit there and trade in and out all day long, it's just not possible unless you want to chew up your account. So this right here is what I'm looking at in the dollar, you can see how the dollar is really just chopping sideways at this point and going into a little bit of it's finally entering into the apex of this triangle, and now what I'm waiting for is for it to pop out of one side or the other. So depending on what it can do, let's see if I can actually annotate this for you. Let's see.
One of the interesting moves we're watching right now over the last few sessions is a drop in the euro.
Kind of playing with this right now, and remember, at some point this market is going to pop out of this triangle, so it's a matter of time. We just got to be patient and let the market do what it wants to until it's ready. And I think it'll probably do that until you know, we get the interest rate announcements. This is typical for the market, as you all know. Guess not. I thought I could annotate this. Okay, so the bottom line is that we're just waiting for the market to actually decide, or pick a side for that matter, decide what it wants to do. Let's see, still kind of learning this.
It does seem that they're pretty comfortable with the timing of what is priced in, and I think the key element that we'll be focusing on is will be other market participants with their own forecast for growth.
Bear with me while I...
Modest chance that we see a small downward revision to both growth and inflation.
Okay, so looking for this market to either bounce up here, come through, and then do one of the see if I could do that again.
Possibly a little earlier than that, whereas some in the market say, look, it's not coming till 2020. Why do you think you've got that slightly more hawkish view?
Well, I think we have a more hawkish too.
Okay, so this is the expectation at this point.
That they would like to get out of these negative rates. I think you see it from the German contingent. And the wages I mentioned before.
Typically what we can anticipate is that the market will actually trade. It'll break out, and when it does that, we can get a directional pull in one direction or another. Okay, so you're gonna go to your 8-hour chart, and you can see the triangle here kind of developing. And as it stands, I mean, look how quiet. You see how quiet this market is right now. This is your last 8 hours, and the market has literally done nothing. And because of that, we have to be really just very patient. This is the time to allow the market to do whatever it's gonna, you know, just wait till it breaks one of these directions, and then we can actually get active. So I'm not really doing too much. However, what has caught my attention is the Canadian dollar. Okay, so the Canadian dollar at this point, let's go take a quick look there. You can see that over the last, so these are 8-hour bars, and the last 16 hours have been very quiet. Let's see, what do we got going on over here? Looks like the pound is starting to get a little bit of activity. Excuse me. Pound dollar is starting to climb here, but you can see that it's still within the previous 8-hour bar trading range. Okay, keep an eye on that pound. Pound dollar is actually starting to get a little activity. Looks like the pound Swiss is, or you could probably go with the pound yen for that matter. The pound yen is where I'm at. Looks like the market is getting ready for the European Open, the London Open for that matter. Sorry. Let's pay attention here real quick. Keep an eye on that pound yen. Pound yen is on fire right now. Got the pound dollar as well. All right. Pound dollar. Okay, starting to get some activity here in the pound.
But they're going to be very concerned about the uncertainty around that. So yeah, I think February is certainly a possibility, but it's subject to agreement around that.
But we're getting more headlines across from Jean-Claude Juncker saying that he is that the EU is ready to work day and night to reach a Brexit deal. Also says that he welcomes Theresa May's proposal.
Pound New Zealand. What's the pound New Zealand? Okay, it looks like pound pairs across the border actually starting to catch some attention here. So you got the London session open coming here. Finally giving you something to do.
I've got a super depressing chart here, Andrew, and we're talking all week about going back to
Nice little jump there. Back above 130 is the pound. This is what I was talking about, where, you know, even though the market had gone down, I believe, or I think that this market is setting up to push higher.
hasn't recovered to the same extent that others have, and we see this in other areas as well. For
This is the point and figure chart. We just came down to the backside of this trend line, and now we're poised, or we're setting up to go higher. So on my radar is the pound dollar.
So we've really seen the employment market pick up. It's taken a long time, and even then, frankly, wage increases have been pretty modest in the context of the unemployment rate. Europe is different in the sense there's still a lot of spare capacity.
Question is whether or not that's going to be a big fake out.
Italy, Spain, maybe even France.
Don't chase it. Don't chase it.
So I think those capacity constraints that push.
Okay, there'll be plenty of opportunity, plenty of time to get in.
In Europe, some perhaps early signs that is starting to happen. But again, if you look at the experience of the US, you know, we had unemployment below the Nairi for quite some period of time before we saw any movement in wages. And I guess that, you know, we'd look at it now and say, you know, average hourly earnings in the US.
Okay, we're back above the 15, back above the 60, still above the 240. So the pound dollar is definitely setting up nicely. Let's go over here and put on a. Just going to put on a moving average. Nothing fancy. Just want the 50 period moving average. Okay. So you can see here now, what we'll do is we'll go down through our time frames. All right, so this is the 8 hour. You can see, and mentally we need to keep an eye mentally. So 8 hour chart, the 50 period moving average, we are bullish. We are above the 50 on the 8 hour. On the 4 hour, we are above the 50 on the 4 hour. We can go to the 1 hour. We're above the 50 there. On the 15, we are above the 50 there. And then on the 5 minute, we are above the 50 there as well. Okay. So just kind of keep that in mind, that assuming that this market continues to trade the above this 50 period moving average, then we're just going to continue to look for strength here in the pound. Good morning, Marcel. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you stopping by. terms of the DAX, you know, I would, you know, the bottom line is that I pay attention to the dollar index. The dollar is what I trade, and you can see here over the past 5 minutes the market has continued to move lower. So if this market continues to trade lower, it's definitely going to push the DAX up. I'll show you what I'm looking at here on an 8-hour chart in the dollar. You can see here this triangle formation that we have in mind, and the fact that we're still consolidating, really nothing going on. And this is, in my opinion, this is why the DAX, I would imagine the DAX is not doing anything at this point. Okay, you can see here that the market has been relatively quiet over the past 8, 16, 32, almost 40 hours. Over the last 1.5 day and a half, you can see market really not doing anything. So my expectation is that we're in a sideways consolidation in a lot of markets, including the DAX. And overall, I don't think the DAX is going to move until we actually start to get a breakout here. You might get some choppiness, or you might get the DAX breaking one way, like a going sideways consolidation. But I'm waiting for this market to actually break above this trend line here or below this lower trend line. And once it does that, that's when I think you'll get a directional move in the DAX. So I'm just waiting patiently here for the ECB, or excuse me, the interest rate out of the London Central Bank, which happens tomorrow. But in the meantime, as it stands right now, we're getting set up. We're about 10 minutes away before the London session open, and at that point, I think that we might get, you know, setting up right now. Like I was saying, the London session open, the pound dollar is actually starting to get a little bit of activity here. Finally starting to wake up here is are the traders in London, and you can see that we're just a poke above the last 8-hour bar. Really nothing too exciting here, but if you can tell, as you can see here on the 5-minute chart, nice little boost of activity in the pound dollar. So this is pretty much where I'd be focusing my attention for more upside to come. Okay, so once again, back above the 130 area is the pound dollar. You're at 130.30. Little boost of that's a nice little short covering rally. And so in the meantime, this has my attention for more upside. Assuming that we can continue to move here, I'd be watching the pound New Zealand. You can see the pound New Zealand is starting to trail off. The pound yen has my attention too. You can see the pound yen is actually showing nice little strength here. And the reason why it's showing strength is because the Japanese yen is on the highs as well. Or, excuse me, not this one. Not on the 5-minute chart. Let's go take a look at the hourly. Yeah, you can see on the hourly chart the Japanese yen has been trending over the past couple of this last hour bar has started to pull back, but you had a little bit of creep up here over the past couple hours. The most important thing here is to be aware that the current trading session is in London. You have the activity is taking place in London right now, and so given the fact that that's the case, I think that I will probably actually just focus on the pound dollar and also the pound yen. So while I have you here, folks, if you're enjoying the conversation, I appreciate you to go and hit the like button underneath the video, of course, and then of course don't hesitate to actually hit the subscribe button. It'll let you know when we're actually live, and it's very helpful or encouraging for us to come back and do it again. But looking forward to doing more sessions like this. I believe that trading is a lonely endeavor. One of the first rules that I always incorporate is not to trade in a closet, or rather do not trade by yourself, because you can have a tendency to do yourself damage if you're trading alone. Sometimes you have a tendency to doubt yourself or to question what it is that you're doing. So I think that it's good to be to trade with other people, or at least have other people to bounce ideas off of. So again, just kind of getting started here for the London session open, and the current trading environment is showing me that we should probably be paying attention to the pound dollar here. Nice boost of activity here. All right, so we're just getting. It looks like we're just getting started too with this pound move. So I'm expecting more upside. More upside to come in the pound is my expectation. Go take a look at the dashboard here. Remember, if you're new to the broadcast, what we do is we pay attention to the major currency pairs. The major currency pairs are the dollar, the Swiss franc, the Canadian dollar, Japanese yen, the euro, the pound, the Aussie, New Zealand. Now, the reason I focus on that is because it allows me to eliminate a lot of confusion. It allows me to just kind of strip away a lot of the other pairs that are traded out there, and predominantly only have to worry about a select few. So the nature of what I'm trading is that I pay attention to the dollar index futures, which is in the top left hand part of the grid, the Dixie, and assuming that I can figure out what is happening there, that's where I start my analysis, and that's where I develop a sense of a bias. But if I start there and do my analysis on the dollar, then it helps me understand what's happening in the rest of the pairs. The pairs across the top of the grid are all positively correlated. You're going to see that the dollar is correlated with the Swiss franc, the Canadian dollar, and the Japanese yen. Now this happens majority of the time. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen a majority of the time. And if the dollar is going up, then I can expect those other three to go up as well. Whereas on the bottom here, you have the euro, pound, Aussie, New Zealand, which tend to go in the opposite direction. So once you get an idea about that, then you can see my dashboard here that I'm looking at the dollar here on the top left. This is a weekly time frame, and you can see that the dollar is basically trading inside of last week's trading range. Okay, so you have the current week's low above last week's low, the current week's high below last week's high, and this is what we call an inside bar. But primarily what we're talking about is the fact that we have an inside or a trading range that has not been able to exceed last week's trading range. And you can get a sense for why the markets are quiet is because basically the dollar hasn't done anything. Why is the dollar so important to me is because it's pretty much the major currency on the playing field. It is like the big daddy on the hill. So if it's not doing anything, then chances are the rest of the markets will be relatively quiet. And we can see this across the board here. You can see that the Swiss franc is trading inside of last week's trading range. The Canadian dollar is trading in last week's trading range. However, the Canadian dollar has caught my attention because it's near last week's low. And we can actually kind of use this to formulate a trading idea where we might be looking at a test of last week's low and if we get a bounce, then we might actually start to go higher. So I'm watching the Canadian dollar out of the side of my eye to see if we can start to build strength there for a short covering rally, or if we're going to break below last week's low. The Japanese yen here, you can see, is trading inside last week's trading range, and more importantly, it is towards the upper end of last week's trading range. But most importantly, it's been trading sideways going back a number of weeks, and therefore that's probably the answer to the question, why is the Japanese yen so quiet? You can see that it's really just been trading inside of a couple, inside the previous week's trading range. Same thing with the euro. The euro at the beginning of the week, was able to test last week's low, and then it bounced very aggressively all the way up to 116.43, and now we've actually pulled back to 115.91. Right here we're inside of last week's trading range, but we are at the middle of last week's trading range, so it'd be interesting to see if we can actually get some support here and then start to move higher. When you take a look at the pound dollar, you can see that the pound actually did try to break out of last week's high, and right now it looks like that's what we're dealing with at this point, where we're trading right around last week's high, and we're trying to break out of last week's trading range going to the upside. Overall, you can see that we have higher highs and higher lows from the weekly standpoint, albeit that they're minor for that matter. But most importantly, you can see that the market is trading rather bullish at this point, even though it's just kind of creeping up. On the flip side, you have the Australian dollar and the New Zealand dollar having having some trouble staying off the floor. So they're not cooperating with this move right now, and this is what happens when you have a choppy market. This is what happens when the dollar is choppy. You have no conviction across the board. So you can see that none of these markets are really doing anything, and therefore it's impacting the fact that the dollar is not doing anything. So this is the time for us to kind of sit back and protect our accounts, or at the very least probably keep our powder dry. There are some trades that we could probably take, like we just saw here in the pound that I'm looking at, to see if this pound can continue higher. And the only reason is because the financial center at this point is London. Okay, so they're open for business in London. We're getting a little bit of activity, but it looks like that could have been it, where we just basically went up and tested last week's high, last week's high, and found resistance. Okay, so it's kind of interesting how the market just shot up like that, and now we're just kind of we're pulling back. So I won't be surprised if that was just a big fake out, that's for sure. Remember, we have the banks, we have the interest rate announcement coming out tomorrow. See if I can bring that in again. Oops. Okay, once again, this is your calendar for the week. And again, as you can see, the only thing that I pay attention to are the red, the impact. The only thing that I care about are the events that have a high impact. And today, really, there's nothing going on out of London for that matter. But tomorrow, we have the official bank rate. Okay. So it's pretty important to wait for that. I think that's what everybody's waiting for. Okay, so the Bank of England is coming out with their rate decision. The expectation is that they're going to leave it unchanged. You can see here that the previous reading was at 75 basis points, and then the expectation is that they're going to leave it the same this week. They're not going to do anything. Okay, this is a good place to actually get some information on it if you need to, right? And that kind of carries for all of these. You can, if you're wondering what they are, all you got to do is click on the folder here, and then that'll actually give you detail about it. You should always look at your trading calendar probably every single day before you actually, when you sit down at your desk, you need to glance at that and just make sure that you're not going to be sideswiped by something that actually jumps out at you. So for the most part right now, we're just waiting for the London session to get open, and it looks like we had a nice little burst there in the pound dollar, and the question is whether or not it's going to continue to stay that way. I'm watching also the Japanese yen, because the Japanese yen is on the highs for the week, and I'm wondering if we could actually find some resistance at last week's high, or if we're going to actually break out of last week's high. At the same time, I'm looking on the opposite side of the spectrum where we're paying attention to the Canadian dollar. The Canadian dollar is actually trading near last week's low, and it actually did hit last week's low by about 2 points. Okay, so we did come down and test last week's low already, and now the question is whether or not we're going to trade below last week's low, or if we're going to use it as support and then continue to move higher. So I'm looking for a short covering rally there in the Canadian dollar, and I'm looking for the Japanese yen to actually to trade back to the downside, assuming that this market is really not going to have anything to do ahead of the interest rate announcement coming out of the Bank of England. So for that matter, like I said, we're focusing primarily on the dollar index, and the dollar has been telling us that it's in a quiet trading environment, and so because of that, we really don't want to be getting overly excited about our trades. We will get something to do, but the problem is that the markets are showing us that we should probably be sitting on our hands right now. Once again, taking a look here at the dollar here. Okay, so we're in this triangle formation, and the market is just kind of waiting. You can see that we've gone sideways here over the last couple of days, and because of that, I don't want to get overly excited about going one direction or another. So you just got to be patient. At this point, like I said, the pound dollar has really got my attention because it got a nice little spike pushing us back above 130. That's what I'm looking at over here. Okay, I'm also, let's go take a look at the Swiss franc, or the Canadian dollar. Canadian dollar back to 130.54, and what I need to see is the market get below 130.51. Okay, so this will be our breakout point here in the Canadian dollar. If we can get down below that, then we need to be paying attention to that. The pound dollar looks like it's continuing to show a little bit of strength here. Okay, this is what we want to see. More upside in the pound coming. Japanese yen looks like it's falling back from last week's high. Let me take a quick look here at my major dashboard. last week's high is at 111.75. Okay, last week's high on the yen is 111.75. Last week's low in the Canadian dollar is at 130.37. So those I keep an eye on this Japanese yen. What was that number I say? 111.75. Okay. That's probably up here. Yep, that's this one right here. Okay, so as long as we can stay below that level, as long as we can stay below this, we need to be looking for downside in the Japanese yen. Let's take a look at throwing up a trend line that we can use. Looks like we're right at a trend line here. If you connect a trend line from the absolute low, looks like we've already broken it, and we've tested it from the backside here. So that's what you look for in terms of a move after you break you have a break of the trend line. So you have 3 touches of a line here, and then we broke down here, rally back up to the backside, and now we're actually pushing down, and on top of that we're breaking below this intermediate low right here. So the Japanese yen is definitely setting up. Okay, so keep an eye on the Japanese yen for downside. This is possibly going to set up for the rest of the week. Looking for more downside in the yen. On top of that, we are confirming it in the rest of the currency pairs. So I need to get out of my pound yen there. I was thinking that the pound yen was actually going to go higher, but now I'm seeing that the Japanese yen is not cooperating, so we don't want to be long the pound yen. Look at that. Pound New Zealand looks like it's ready to move up. You see a sideways consolidation, so I'll be watching the keep an eye on the Pound New Zealand. If you get a pullback, if you can get a quick pullback down to 199.33, this is the 50 period moving average on the hourly chart. If you can get a pullback to the 199.31 area, that's a nice little entry to the to buy, and then looking for this market to actually break out to the upside. Be on alert here. The Pound New Zealand looks like it's setting up for a nice move to the upside. Again, because I'm seeing weakness on the Japanese yen, you can see here on the hourly chart in the Japanese yen that given the fact that we were at last week's high, we tried to trade near last week's high, but the market was unable to go and test the high. That's what this line up here is. This high up here at 111.75 is last week's high, and the market was unable to make it there. You see how the market traded up to that point, and now we're actually starting to fail. You can see that we're actually pushing. We pushed below the trend line, came back to the backside of the trend line, tested it, and now we're actually falling below this intermediate low, making a lower low, officially a lower low here So it looks like downside is coming in the Japanese yen. We're just getting started. Going back to recap on what I'm looking at in the dollar. Again, the dollar index, I'm waiting for this market to actually break out of this triangle pattern here. Once I can get this market to actually pick a direction, it looks like right now the market is trying to set up to push to the bottom, but I think that we need to be patient. So you know, I like the long side in the pound because the pound is the one that's actually moving right now, and that's typical because right now the actual trading session that's open is in London. So it looks like we came up to this previous high here, 130.39, and we're actually running into resistance. So we got to be really careful here. But overall, even if we trade back to the downside, you see that we have support right here at 130 even. It looks like 130 even is an important level to pay attention to. Remember that just waiting for this the interest rate announcement coming out of London, and that's not until tomorrow, so you can understand why this market will actually be relatively choppy. You can see here the dollar index is actually finding a spot to bounce at. So it's bouncing at, it looks like yesterday's low. Overall completely sideways here. And that's the reason it's in my opinion, it's really important to be watching the dollar, because the dollar impacts the rest of the markets. The good thing though is that the pound is giving us something to do here, so you could go and take a look at your 5-minute chart. Okay, so it looks like we're chopping sideways. We're just consolidating right now, but I'm thinking that we're getting ready for the next move. So any kind of a pullback down into 130.23 is going to be important. You can see here the 50-period moving average on the 5-minute chart down at 130.12. I think is going to be it's going to be important too. But I think this move is just getting started. 15-minute chart. Now remember, again, if we go through our time frames here on the pound dollar, you can see that we are above the 5-minute 50-period moving average, right? So that's bullish. We are above the 50-period moving average on the 15-minute chart. That's bullish. We're above the 50-period moving average on the hourly chart. That's bullish. You can go to the I was looking at the 4-hour chart. Thank you for throwing that out there, Marcel. I appreciate that. I was not paying attention to my mute button. So back to what I was saying a minute ago, that the Japanese yen is sitting here at an intermediate. It's breaking. Okay, so let me go back to the 5-minute chart here, and you can see here that we are going back above this intermediate low. This right here is the breakdown point where I was looking to see if we can get below this 111.44. This might encourage me to get short the Japanese yen. Okay, so what you're noticing here on the 1 hour chart is how we broke this rising trend line here. We broke the rising trend line here. We tested the backside of the rising trend line here. That's a good way of confirming that there's more downside to come. And then now we're actually we're trying to break below this intermediate low. Now what I can expect, or what I'm looking for, is that if it's not going to break and hold on this hourly bar, then I think that we're actually going to push to probably 111.50, 111.55, and actually push back up here and test this high at 111.57, and that's actually where I'll probably start to initiate short position in the Japanese yen for it to push back below 111.40. That'll give me a nice tight stop there that I can use. Okay, so it looks like the as we look at that, yeah, I'm just kind of I'm kind of hanging back, because you're right. If the Japanese yen can stay off of this low, my contention though is that this line up here, this 111.75 here, is last week's high. So my opinion, or you should say, what I'm expecting, my expectation is that it won't get above this high. So I wouldn't be surprised if it actually comes back up and then tries to get as high as it can up into this zone and then fails. Bottom line is that the Japanese yen right now is not really performing, or shall I say, it's at last week's high. Let's go take a quick look at the Canadian dollar here. Okay, so here's the Canadian dollar. You can see that we're trading next to last week's low. This is another one that I'm looking at potentially getting short. Okay, this line that we're looking at 130.41 is last week's low. And if we can trade below last week's low, then I'll be expecting more downside here. I'll be watching this as a breakout trade. The reason I'm thinking that we're going to continue to move lower is because the pound is moving higher. The Japanese yen is at a major resistance level, and I'm expecting the euro dollar to go higher. Okay, so at this point, my radar is paying attention to what's going to happen. I've got the Canadian dollar and the Japanese yen. I'm already positioned in the pound dollar right around 130.15. So at this point, I'm just kind of being patient here, looking for this market to actually get some more legs to the downside in the Canadian dollar. Looking at the Japanese yen to start to run out of steam. It could actually go back as high as, I think that as long as it stays below 111.77, I think that will be fine. looking at the pound dollar to break out. Looking at more upside here in the pound. I think that move is just now getting started. So I'm liking what I see. I think there's going to be a nice little run on the pound dollar throughout the day. So I think that's probably the one that we should be paying attention. I mean, if you're not positioned in the pound dollar, then you need to be looking for opportunities to get in the pound. Alright, so it looks like we're at 130.38. Looks like we're about to hit the 140 area. Going to break out of the 140 area. Also pay attention to that pound New Zealand. The pound Kiwi is actually on the in the corner of my eye here, waiting to see it go above 2 even, the major 2 handle, because that's going to encourage the pound dollar to go up a little bit. Again, we're still looking at the dollar index. The dollar needs to break out, and I think that's what what the market is waiting for too. As soon as the dollar can actually break out of the downside of this triangle, remember that's really the focus here. You have a major triangle here in the dollar that we're actually waiting to see if this market could actually break out of. Okay, so for the most part, sideways consolidation in the dollar. And at this point, when the dollar decides to pick a direction, then we'll actually see more aggressive move in the rest of the markets. But again, what looks like oh yeah, I thought the Swiss franc. So I was looking at the price of the Swiss franc. Oh, there's the, okay, there goes the pound. Okay, the pound dollar is spiking. Loving it, loving it, loving it. Watching the dollar, because if the dollar can actually confirm what's happened in the pound. Let's go take a look at the euro for that matter. Okay, we're back above 116. You can see that the pound or the euro is really quiet. Euro is not doing anything. It's all the pound right now. It's pound New Zealand. Pound New Zealand is at 190, 199.90. There it is. Okay. So I'm liking what I see here. Let's go take a look at this pound yen here. What did I get out of the pound yen? Great. Jumped out of the pound yen too early. Okay, pound. This is the Japanese yen here, pushing below this intermediate low. I'll be waiting to see it make a move to the downside and then come back up to it and use it as resistance. You can see that you're already starting to establish your first downtrend line here on the Japanese yen. Okay, so you know, we want to be focusing on where the market is trading at this point, and considering the fact that we have a downtrend line and we're below the downtrend line, we need to be looking to the short side here in the Japanese yen. Swiss franc looks like it's relatively quiet on the 1 hour chart. Remember, the Canadian dollar is really where I got my attention. So while I wait for my charting package to get fired back up, just a quick update here. It looks like waiting again. Let's see if this dollar can actually break out to the downside, because that's where I think the market is starting to show its hand, that we have a little bit of dollar downside coming. I'm still waiting for that trend line to be broken out to the downside. You have the triangle formation that this market is making. We have a little ways to go before we actually get down there, but you know, I'm thinking that the true catalyst isn't going to be until the interest rate announcement. Now the question is whether or not the pound can actually continue to show strength over the course of the trading session. Looking across the board here, the dollar is down almost 0.2%. We have the Swiss franc yen that's down 0.2%. On the flip side, we have the CAD Swiss up 0.2%. So again, the markets are really quiet here, and this is what I say is that if there are no markets that are above or below 1% to the pops to the upside or the downside, then the market is relatively quiet. We just got to be really patient and pick our be very picky about our trades. Just a quick recap here, looking at the weekly charts, of course. Okay, so again, this right here is where I start looking at everything. The dollar is where I start to pay attention to the trade. Okay, so it looks like we are inside of last week's trading range. Haven't broken out at all. And you can see across the board that everything else is the same. Swiss franc, Canadian dollar, Japanese yen. We have the euros inside last week. The pound dollar is above last week's high, and that's why we're going long, is because the market is showing that it wants to go higher, at least for right now. It might be a scalping environment because the rest of the markets are not moving. They're not breaking out of last week's trading range, so this is probably something that we should not hold on to from the pound dollar's perspective, or we're just waiting for the rest of the market to catch up, which could happen tomorrow. So you can imagine that there's a short covering rally happening in the pound, and in my opinion, it's due to the fact that you have the London Central Bank, you have the Bank of England is releasing their interest rate announcement tomorrow. Take a look at the Australian dollar. It's inside of last week's trading range, but it's not below last week's low, which is what we were looking at coming into the trading session. So when I got started this morning, the Australian dollar was below last week's low, and now we're above last week's low. So this is important here because this is giving us a little bit of an insight that there's possibly some more downside coming in the dollar, You can see how the euro or the Australian dollar is holding above this week and last week's low. The New Zealand dollar is actually off of the lows for this week. You can see now, if you remember coming in at the beginning of this broadcast, the New Zealand dollar was actually a little bit lower, and now we're actually pushing up here. So I want to emphasize the fact that the market is, not only is it choppy, but it does look like the dollar is kind of pushing a little bit lower overall. Not too much to be getting excited about. Okay, so we don't really have any major events. Here's the Canadian dollar. We're waiting for this market to go down below 130.40. That's the idea here. So I guess put that literally on your chart alerts. And then of course we're looking at the Japanese yen. Okay, it's still above this intermediate low. Alright, part of me thinks that we could actually go up to this falling trend line here, 111.55, and then find some resistance there. Look for a downside potential here at 111.32 in the Japanese yen. Trying to be patient here, looking across the board, paying attention to looking at my net change dashboard. Okay, looking at my watch list with the net change on it. Nothing above 0.2%, nothing below 0.2% negative on the market. So another quiet session here during the London trading session, even though the pound dollar has pushed up off of the lows. Really what it's done is just regained all of its all the losses from earlier. You know, it went down below 129. I think it went down as low as 129.94 or whatever. Okay, starting to get a little pushback here. Okay, so found some resistance there, 130.39. Be careful here. If you're long the pound, be careful. Looking at the 5-minute chart on the pound, I think that there is support right around 130.16. See here. Yeah, 130.15, 130.18 is the 50-period moving average on the 5-minute chart. So again, because the rest of the markets are not really doing anything, got to be careful here. Look at this, big bars coming in to the downside. So this is definitely not the time to be getting entered. Not the time to enter into a long position. We have a better opportunity below the market. Coming down to test the lower end of this trading range, 130.23. Question is, should we be initiating new long positions? We are testing, it looks like the 20-period moving average on the 5-minute chart. Just looks like there's too much selling coming in actually. Let's see, let me go take a look at the dollar. Yep, that's what I was thinking. Okay, so the dollar actually bounced at that lower trend line. That explains everything. Okay, so looking at here, the dollar came down to the lower trend line and actually bounced off of it. Remember we were talking about a minute ago this triangle formation. Let's go take a look at the hourly chart here. What? That doesn't look right. Okay, so according to this hourly chart, we did not come down to the bottom of the trend line, but we did get a nice low bounce at the lows. What is this? Oh, this is crap. So basically we came down, tested yesterday's lows. That's really what we were bouncing at, was yesterday's low. Pretty sure that's yesterday's low. Gotta change the timestamp on this thing.
Bloomberg surveillance. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, some rare positive news in the European retail sector. Shares of retail Inditex higher after company forecast that sales growth may accelerate and profitability will improve. Now, this comes as the Zara operator expands online and makes its stores more efficient. Well, joining us now is Andrea Felstead. She covers retail for Bloomberg Opinion. Andrea, great to have you on the program. So first of all, this looks like it has reassured investors, but is it enough?
No, it certainly has reassured investors. The shares are up. They've had a rotten couple of weeks, but there are bigger challenges out there, and they are not going to go away with an upbeat statement.
Right, so the shares are up, but actually, you're actually right. In the first instance, we saw that revenue may accelerate, but actually they had a pretty rough quarter, I think the worst sales revenue in about 4 years. What's underlying that? What's the reason behind it?
Well, I mean, there are a few sort of, quarter-specific themes. The weather was very hot, the euro was very strong, but there are some really underlying things that are going on, and I think it is primarily the rise of the discount retailers, mainly Primark. And you might think, oh, well, Zara and Primark operate in different sectors of the market. No, they don't. Everybody shops there.
So if you pay attention to the 4-hour chart on the dollar index, remember the dollar, this is the actual chart that I've been watching going back a couple days. This is where we started the week here, and then came back down to the lower end of this triangle here. Now we continue to trade in between it, so we haven't really broken out either direction. And I think it's vital to pay attention to whether or not this market is going to go above or below. It looks like we're getting a nice little bounce there in the Canadian dollar, and so the Canadian dollar is what we were paying attention to in terms of seeing whether or not this market would actually rally off of the lows. Looks like right now we're getting that kind of a push. Looks like the Swiss franc. Okay, so Canadian dollar holding the lows. If we can go above 130.75, I think that's going to set up for more upside in the Canadian dollar. Okay, you can see how we couldn't even come down to the low here at 130.38 on this retest. Just happened at 130.42. So keep an eye on this. This Canadian dollar is actually starting to spike now. So the dollar is finding some strength. So it looks like all the activity that we were witnessing a minute ago is pretty much all dried up. Once again, we're just sitting here waiting for the market to actually pick a direction. As you can see, the markets have been relatively quiet ever since the London session opened. We did have a nice little burst of activity that came in during the London Open. You had a nice little breakout above 130 even in the pound dollar. For the most part, not really doing anything, but as long as we could stay above 130, I'm thinking that the market could set up for a nice push to the upside. But the problem is that the dollar index, remember the dollar, focus on what we're looking at. The dollar index is right at the inside of a triangle formation on the 8-hour chart, and I don't think that we're going to get any kind of a breakout until the next trading session. In the meantime, it looks like we're chopping around across the board. Remember, talking about all the currency pairs are trading inside of last week's trading range, except for the pound dollar and the New Zealand dollar. But the pound dollar was above last week's trading high. It looks like we're actually pulling back into it. Then we're looking at the New Zealand dollar was actually below last week's trading low, but we were kind of backing off of the lows here, kind of pulling up here. Again, dollar index basically trading inside of last week's trading range, and therefore the rest of the markets are not really doing anything. In terms of like watching for setups coming up, I'm looking for the Japanese yen to see if it can trade off of last week's high. Looks like we're approaching last week's high, but we're not really close enough to breakout point. The other one that I'm looking at is the Canadian dollar. The Canadian dollar is at last week's low, so I'm looking for that to actually hold as support and potentially bounce to the upside. And then I'm looking for a breakout at 130.77 in the Canadian dollar. If we can push back to the upside, that's going to set up for a move back up to 131 and change. Looks like the pound dollar, after a breakout above last week's high, pushing all the way up to about 130.45 or something. It's definitely pulling back below last week's high. So again, pulling back inside of last week's trading range. The market's really just quiet, waiting for that interest rate announcement from the Bank of England tomorrow. And you'll be looking at my charts here in a minute. We do have potential setup in the Japanese yen if it can stay below last week's high, and we have a setup in the Canadian dollar if it can stay above last week's low. So we'll go take a look here at that. As you can see, this is the actual chart that I'm looking at for the Canadian dollar. If we can get back above 130.77, then that's going to set up for a nice move to the upside there. And then on the other Japanese yen, if we can actually stay below this trend line here, I'm looking for more downside to come in the Japanese yen. The problem with the Japanese yen though right now is that we actually have a rising 50-period moving average on the hourly chart. That to me is a little bit of a bullish indication here. Okay, watching that Canadian dollar, because the Canadian dollar looks like it's about to test the 50 on the 5. If we can go back above the 50 moving average on the 5-minute chart, then that's going to be enticing to the upside. Again, taking a look here at the dollar index futures, you can see that this is the dollar on a 1-hour chart. Market came down below yesterday's low and then found support. You see that we got a fake out at yesterday's low, tried to push down below yesterday's low, found the buyers, and now here we are back inside of yesterday's trading range. Not really doing anything to talk about there. And so, you know, everything that we thought was going to happen in terms of the actual activity that came in was really just nothing, So we need to pay attention here to the Canadian dollar, because I think the Canadian dollar is setting up to actually push above the breakout point here. You can see that we're breaking above the last we got a doji here forming here, so I like what I'm seeing. More upside to come in the Canadian dollar. Looks like the Japanese yen here is starting to push. I'm liking what I see there. Okay, keep an eye on the Japanese yen. Quick look at the New Zealand dollar. We're actually testing the 1 hour 50. I like the idea of testing the short side here in the New Zealand dollar. The problem is the context here. I don't like the fact that we have a higher low here, just sideways consolidation. I would rather wait. I have a better setup here in the Swiss franc, or I would say the Canadian dollar is really where I'm watching. Canadian dollar, Japanese yen. Those two have my eye at the moment. No need to get overly excited here. Looks like the pound dollar is back on the lows, getting close to 15 here. Testing the 50 period movement on the 5 minute. Not really excited here, just hanging tight.
reported record first-half profit. The maker of broken handbags that cost $10,000 or more was boosted by strong sales in China. Still, the Chinese stock market's climb has investors in the luxury sector concerned. Call it China's Tesla wannabe. An electric car car maker, whose shares begin trading today on the New York Stock Exchange. NIO raised about $1 billion selling shares in its IPO near the lower end of its target range. The sale values the company at about $6.4 billion. A Singapore sovereign wealth fund is interested in buying General Electric's jet leasing unit. Bloomberg has learned that the fund executives have asked GE if it would consider selling all or part of the company's aviation services. GE owns almost 2,000 aircraft valued at about $40 billion.
Alright, since we are basically just sitting here in a hurry up and wait mode, I'm basically going to sign off. I was noticing that the dollar index is basically trading inside of its the triangle that we were looking at on the 8-hour chart going back to last month. Now, if you start to get a breakout, which I think can actually happen during the New York trading session, that might be something to pay attention to. In the meantime, the expectation is that we are basically just in a holding pattern until tomorrow's trading session, where the London Central Bank comes out and actually releases their interest rate announcement. In the moment, we're also looking at a couple of key developments. We're talking about the Canadian dollar. Pay attention to that Canadian dollar. If it can stay above last week's low, then that'll be interesting setup for the rest of the day, considering that you're going to be looking for a bounce and then a potential breakout of the high there. I think it was around 130.74. And then looking at the Japanese yen to see if it can actually stay below yesterday's high. If it can stay below last week's high. If it can stay below last week's high, then that actually is going to set up for a nice little down move for the rest of the week in the Japanese yen. The pound dollar, if it can stay above last week's high, that'll be actually enticing for some more upside. Remember, the liquidity is really quiet right now. We are having a nice little test of the 50-period moving average on the 5-minute chart in the pound dollar, but nothing really excited to be talking about, and it's better to probably just sit back and wait for the actual interest rate announcement tomorrow, and then we'll see if the market will actually give us something to do. So in the meantime, I hope this has been helpful for you. Do Saul a favor and give us a nice little thumbs up if you like the video. Do not hesitate to leave some comments out there, and by all means, please hit the subscribe button if you like what you're seeing. If you have any questions, reach out to us at mail@garciaresearch.net. We're actually working on getting the website going, and hopefully this has been helpful to you all. And this is Andy Garcia signing off. I'll see you at the next update. Good night, everybody, or have a good day. We'll see you at the next. We'll see you in the next trading session.